cafe was small but cozy, with warm sunlight streaming through the windows and the gentle hum of conversations filling the air. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of baked pastries, making it a comforting place for anyone passing by. The tables were mostly filled with people enjoying their afternoon break, and the soft background music added to the relaxed atmosphere. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved with ease, carrying drinks and plates with practiced skill. She had been working there for a few years and knew most of the regular customers by sight and name, but today, something felt a little different. A man entered the cafe, tall and well-dressed, with an air of quiet confidence. He didn't seem like a regular visitor. There was something about his presence that made heads turn slightly. He walked to a table near the window and sat down, placing his expensive-looking bag on the chair beside him. The waitress noticed the man immediately. Something about the way he glanced around the room, observing everything carefully, made her curious. He seemed preoccupied, constantly checking his watch and tapping his fingers lightly on the table. She approached him with a warm smile, holding a notepad and pen. "Good afternoon. Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone friendly and natural. He looked up, a little surprised, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. After a brief pause, he replied, "Just a coffee. Black, please." She nodded and jotted down the order. As she walked to the counter to prepare his coffee, she couldn't help but glance at his watch again. It was a classic design, elegant and understated, yet it carried a sense of history. She felt a strange familiarity, like she had seen a watch just like it before, a long time ago. She shook her head slightly, telling herself she was imagining things. Still, curiosity tugged at her mind. As she prepared the coffee, she thought about the little details she noticed in people. Working at the cafe had taught her to pay attention, to notice small things that others might overlook. Sometimes it was just a way to make conversation, other times it was a genuine interest in the stories behind the objects people carried or wore. She had learned that every person had a story, and even the smallest detail could reveal something significant. Carrying the steaming cup over to the man, she placed it gently on the table. "Here you go. Black coffee, just as you like it," she said with a smile. He thanked her quietly, his eyes briefly meeting hers before looking down at his watch again. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to speak up. "That's a beautiful watch," she said casually. "My mom used to own one just like it." The man froze. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped in the cafe. His hand trembled slightly as he set his cup down, and his face drained of color. The waitress blinked, surprised by his reaction. She hadn't expected him to respond that way. Most people might have nodded politely or smiled, but this man looked pale, tense, and uneasy. Something about her words had clearly struck a chord. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice low and uncertain. The waitress tilted her head slightly, studying his expression. She didn't mean to upset him, only to make a friendly comment. "I just said my mom used to own a watch like yours," she repeated gently. He looked around the cafe, as if searching for an escape, then back at her with a mixture of shock and recognition. She could see that there was a story behind his reaction, something that connected her casual remark to a memory or event he hadn't expected to confront. Feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern, the waitress pulled out the chair across from him and asked softly, "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I didn't expect anyone to mention that watch," he said finally. His voice was shaky, betraying the calm, composed exterior he had tried to maintain. She nodded, encouraging him to continue if he wanted to. There was no rush, and she knew that sometimes people needed a little time to open up. The cafe around them continued as usual, with the hum of conversations, the clinking of cups and saucers, and the occasional laughter from other tables. Yet, for the two of them, the world seemed to shrink to the small space between the table and the chair, a quiet bubble where an unexpected connection had just begun. The man's eyes lingered on the watch, then on the waitress, as if trying to reconcile a memory he had buried long ago with the reality in front of him. The waitress, meanwhile, felt a strange sense of anticipation. She had seen many customers over the years, but this moment felt different. There was a story hidden behind that watch, a story that she wanted to understand, even if it was uncomfortable or complicated. She sipped her own coffee quietly, giving him the space to gather his thoughts, sensing that whatever he was about to say could change her understanding of her mother's past. Minutes passed in silence, each filled with unspoken tension. She watched him closely, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room before settling back on her. She realized that this was more than just a conversation about a watch. It was a confrontation with the past, with memories that neither of them had expected to surface in a quiet cafe on a regular afternoon. Finally, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden he had carried for years. I think it's time I tell you something," he said, his voice steadier now, though still tinged with emotion. The waitress leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued but her demeanor calm and supportive. She had no idea what story would unfold, but she knew that she was witnessing the beginning of something significant, a revelation that would change both of their perspectives on the past. The man paused, collecting his thoughts, then began to speak, his words measured but filled with a quiet urgency. He explained that the watch had a history he had never shared with anyone, a connection to her mother that had been lost and found in ways he had never anticipated. The waitress listened intently, her heart racing with curiosity and anticipation. Each sentence revealed a layer of the past she had never known, a story intertwined with her own family's history. As he spoke, she realized that the watch was more than just a timepiece. It was a symbol of memories, of events long forgotten, and of decisions that had far-reaching consequences. The man's confession was difficult to hear, but it was also strangely liberating, shedding light on secrets that had remained in the shadows for too long. The waitress felt a mix of emotions, shock, sadness, and a growing understanding of the life her mother had lived before her own time. The cafe continued its usual rhythm around them, but the two of them were in a world of their own. The afternoon sunlight highlighted the subtle expressions on their faces, the quiet intensity of the conversation, and the shared realization that sometimes, the smallest details, a watch, a remark, a memory, could connect people in ways they never imagined. She could see that this encounter was the start of a journey, one that would reveal truths, heal old wounds, and perhaps even offer a chance for reconciliation. As the conversation wound down for the moment, the man looked at the waitress with a mix of relief and apprehension. She nodded gently, understanding that this was only the beginning. The story of the watch, her mother, and the unexpected connection between them had just begun to unfold. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope that some understanding could come from the past, and she felt a growing curiosity to learn more about the life her mother had lived, the choices she had made, and the secrets that had shaped their lives in ways she had never imagined. The waitress took a deep breath, looking out the window at the sunlit street, feeling a strange sense of destiny in the encounter. She had come to the cafe that day expecting a routine shift, but instead, she had stepped into a story that would linger in her mind long after the last customer left. The man's pale face and startled reaction were a testament to the unexpected twists of life, and she knew that what had begun with a simple remark about a watch would lead to revelations neither of them could have predicted. In that small cafe, with the comforting hum of everyday life around them, an extraordinary story quietly began to unfold. The man sat back in his chair, staring at the watch on his wrist as if it were the key to unlocking a past he had tried to keep buried. The waitress watched him carefully, sensing that the story behind that watch was more than just a simple history. She felt her curiosity growing, but she wanted to be patient, letting him choose when to speak. The cafe around them continued in its usual rhythm, customers chatting, plates clattering, and the aroma of coffee filling the air. Yet, in that small corner, time seemed to move differently, slower, almost as if it were giving space for the story to unfold. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and cautious. He explained that many years ago, the watch had belonged to someone very important in her mother's life. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee, as if gathering courage to continue. It wasn't just a watch, he said quietly. It was a gift, a very special gift, and it meant a lot to your mother. Losing it was complicated. The waitress nodded, encouraging him to continue. She felt a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness, knowing that every word he spoke might reveal something she had never known about her mother. He shifted in his seat, glancing around to make sure no one was listening too closely. I shouldn't even be talking about this, he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. But hearing you say that, it brings back memories I've tried to forget. The waitress leaned in, her eyes soft and patient, silently giving him permission to share his story. There was no rush, no judgment, only a willingness to understand. The man took a deep breath and began to recount the events from years ago. Her mother had been involved in a situation that was difficult and full of challenges. There were people who did not always have the best intentions, and sometimes, even the smallest possessions became significant in ways no one could predict. The watch had been a symbol of trust and connection, something her mother had cherished, and losing it had left a lasting mark. The man explained that he had been indirectly involved, though not in a harmful way, yet his choices had affected the chain of events. The waitress listened quietly, absorbing every word. She thought about her mother, about the moments they had shared, and about the life she had lived before the waitress herself had been born. Each revelation painted a more complex picture of her mother, showing her as not just the woman she had known at home, but as someone who had faced challenges with courage and care. The watch, she realized, was a symbol not just of wealth or elegance but of love, trust, and resilience. He continued, describing how the watch had passed from one person to another, ending up in his possession years later. It had been an unexpected turn of events, one that left him feeling responsible and cautious. He admitted that he had kept it for a long time, unsure whether to return it or reveal the truth. Seeing the waitress today, hearing her mention her mother, had forced the memory to surface, and he realized that the right moment to speak had finally arrived. The waitress felt a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper into the story and understand every detail. Another part of her felt a quiet sadness for the struggles her mother had endured, knowing that even small objects like a watch could carry so much weight. She took a deep breath, keeping her thoughts in check, allowing the man to continue without interruption. She sensed that this story, though heavy, was important, and that listening carefully was the best way to honor her mother's memory. He spoke about the people involved, the difficult decisions, and the moments of tension and uncertainty. There were times when her mother had been forced to make choices under pressure, and the watch had become a reminder of both the joys and the hardships of those times. He described situations that were tense and emotional, moments when trust was tested and relationships strained. Through it all, the watch remained a symbol of the connections that mattered most, even when circumstances were challenging. The waitress found herself imagining her mother in those moments, handling the difficulties with grace and strength. She could almost see her, carefully navigating each challenge, holding on to the things that represented love and loyalty. The story made her feel closer to her mother in a way she hadn't before, giving her a deeper appreciation for the life she had lived and the choices she had made. The man paused, looking at the watch again, his expression a mixture of regret and hope. I didn't know if I should ever speak about this, he said softly. It's not easy to admit mistakes, even small ones. But I think your mother would have wanted the truth to be known, and I think it's time for you to know it too. The waitress nodded, understanding that the moment was significant. She realized that this encounter, which had begun with a simple remark about a watch, was revealing truths that had been hidden for years. It was more than a story about an object. It was a story about people, decisions, and the ways in which our actions can ripple through time. He went on to describe the emotions he had carried, the sense of responsibility and guilt that had weighed on him. There were nights he had thought about returning the watch, but fear and uncertainty had held him back. Seeing the waitress, so connected to her mother, had shifted something in him, allowing him to finally share the story. He spoke with honesty and vulnerability, his voice revealing the depth of the emotions he had kept inside. The waitress felt a deep sense of empathy. She understood the burden of carrying a secret and the courage it took to finally speak. She realized that people often carry pieces of others' lives without fully understanding the impact, and that acknowledging mistakes and sharing truths could bring healing. She listened without judgment, giving him the space to express everything he had kept hidden. As he continued, the story revealed small moments of kindness, gestures of care, and instances of courage that her mother had shown. Despite the challenges, her mother had found ways to protect those she loved, and the watch had been a silent witness to these moments. Each detail added layers to the picture of her mother's life, showing that even in difficult circumstances, love and integrity could prevail. The waitress realized that the man's confession was not just about the watch, but about understanding and reconciliation. It was a way of acknowledging the past, of honoring her mother's memory, and of taking responsibility for the role he had played. She felt a mixture of relief and gratitude, knowing that the truth was finally being shared and that the weight of unspoken words was being lifted. The cafe continued its rhythm around them, yet the connection between the waitress and the man deepened. It was a quiet, powerful moment, filled with emotion and understanding. The story of the watch, once hidden and private, was now being brought into the light, and with it came a sense of closure and hope. By the time he finished speaking, the waitress had a new understanding of her mother's life and the events that had shaped it. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that the watch, though just an object, carried stories of love, struggle, and resilience. The man looked at her with a mix of relief and nervousness, and she offered a gentle smile, acknowledging the courage it had taken to share the story. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had been revealed. The cafe's background noise felt distant, as if the world outside had paused to allow this important conversation to unfold. The waitress reflected on the power of simple objects to hold memories and the unexpected ways in which people's lives could intersect. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice quieter now but steady. "Thank you for listening," he said. "It means more than I can express. I've carried this for so long, and being able to share it, it feels like a relief." The waitress nodded, understanding fully. She felt that the connection they had formed, brief as it might have been, was meaningful and important. As the afternoon light shifted through the cafe windows, casting warm patterns on the floor, they both sat in thoughtful silence. The story of the watch had opened doors to understanding, empathy, and reflection. It was a moment neither of them would forget, a reminder that even the smallest details could carry the weight of profound human experience. And in that quiet, sunlit cafe, two lives had intersected in a way that was both unexpected and transformative, all because of a watch and the memories it held. The cafe had grown a little quieter as the afternoon wore on, with some customers leaving and others arriving to fill the tables. Yet the small corner where the waitress and the man sat seemed untouched by the movement around them. The conversation had shifted from the past to the present, but the intensity of the story hung in the air, tangible and real. The man leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table, and spoke in a low voice that carried both hesitation and honesty. He began to share more about the circumstances in which he had come into possession of the watch. It wasn't a simple story of buying or inheriting it. There had been a chain of events that involved several people, each connected in ways that were complicated and delicate. The waitress listened intently, absorbing every detail. She could feel the weight of the choices her mother had made, and now she could see the consequences reflected in the man sitting before her. Every word he spoke seemed to pull her closer into the story, making the past feel vivid and immediate. The man explained that her mother had been in a situation where trust was everything. She had relied on certain people and had extended her kindness in ways that were sometimes taken for granted. The watch had been given as a token of appreciation and love, but it had also become a point of misunderstanding and tension. He admitted that he had been involved, though not maliciously, and that his actions or lack of action had contributed to the confusion and loss. His voice was filled with regret, but also with a desire to make amends. The waitress felt a surge of empathy for both the man and her mother. She could imagine the challenges her mother had faced, the careful decisions she had made, and the way she had navigated a world that wasn't always kind or fair. The man's confession helped her see that her mother's life had been richer, more complex, and sometimes more difficult than she had ever realized. It was a reminder that people carry stories and burdens that others may never see, and that understanding often comes slowly, through listening and reflection. He spoke about a particular incident that had changed the course of events. There had been a disagreement, a misunderstanding that had seemed small at the time but had grown into something more significant. The watch had changed hands unexpectedly, and the man had been faced with a choice: to intervene, to clarify, or to remain silent. He admitted that he had chosen silence out of fear and uncertainty, and that decision had weighed heavily on him ever since. The waitress could see the sincerity in his eyes, the honesty in his words, and she felt that the story was not just about the watch, but about responsibility, courage, and human imperfection. As he continued, the waitress noticed the subtle expressions that crossed his face: hesitation, relief, regret, and finally a cautious hope. He described the moments when he had thought about returning the watch, the nights he had spent pondering whether to reach out, and the internal struggle between fear and the desire to do what was right. It became clear that he had carried more than just a physical object. He had carried guilt, uncertainty, and a longing to set things right. The story was a reminder that sometimes the heaviest burdens are invisible, and that courage often begins with a simple act of honesty. The waitress nodded quietly, offering silent encouragement as he spoke. She realized that the story was teaching her something important, that understanding the past required patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen without judgment. It wasn't about blame or anger. It was about connection, about recognizing the humanity in each other, and about acknowledging the choices that shape lives. She felt that this moment, though unexpected, was a gift, a chance to see her mother's life from a new perspective, and to witness the courage of someone willing to speak the truth. The man paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then shared a memory that had clearly stayed with him for years. He described her mother's kindness, her generosity, and the way she had treated people with respect, even in difficult circumstances. He spoke of her patience, her strength, and her ability to see the good in others. The watch, he explained, had been a symbol of those qualities, a reminder of the love and care she had shown, and the trust she had placed in the people around her. Hearing him speak, the waitress felt a warmth and pride swell inside her. She had known her mother as a loving parent, but now she was beginning to see her as a person with a rich, complex history. The cafe around them seemed to fade further into the background. The sound of clinking cups, the low hum of conversation, and the distant laughter all became secondary to the story unfolding between the two of them. The man's voice carried the weight of years, but it also carried a softness, a vulnerability that made the story feel alive and deeply human. The waitress realized that this was a rare moment, one of those encounters that leave a lasting impact, where the ordinary setting of a cafe becomes the stage for extraordinary revelations. He then described the moment when he first realized the watch's significance. There had been a fleeting recognition, a connection that he couldn't explain at the time. He had seen the watch and felt a sudden, almost overwhelming sense of responsibility and urgency. The waitress could see that this memory was vivid for him, that it had left a lasting impression on his mind and heart. It was a turning point, a moment when the past collided with the present, and the weight of unspoken truths became impossible to ignore. The waitress listened, captivated, as he recounted the small, quiet acts that had shaped the outcome. There were moments of kindness, miscommunication, and unexpected challenges. The story revealed the delicate balance of human relationships, the way small actions could have profound consequences, and how even a simple object like a watch could carry the weight of emotions, trust, and memory. She felt herself drawn into the narrative, imagining the people, places, and events with clarity and empathy. As the story continued, the man shared the internal conflict he had experienced. He had wanted to return the watch, to explain the truth, but fear, pride, and uncertainty had held him back. The waitress understood the struggle. She had faced moments in her own life where the right course of action wasn't clear, and where hesitation could lead to long-lasting consequences. His honesty made the story feel genuine, relatable, and profoundly human. She felt gratitude that he was sharing this part of himself, revealing the vulnerability that many people hide. The man's voice softened as he recounted his decision to finally speak. Seeing the waitress, hearing her mention her mother, had been the catalyst. He realized that the truth needed to be shared, that the past could no longer remain unspoken, and that acknowledging it was the only way to bring clarity and peace. The waitress felt the sincerity in his words, and she sensed that this revelation was more than a confession. It was a step toward understanding, healing, and reconciliation. The afternoon light shifted, casting gentle shadows across the table and highlighting the expressions on their faces. The waitress felt a sense of quiet connection, an unspoken understanding that they were both part of a story larger than themselves. The man's narrative had opened a window into her mother's life, revealing the challenges, joys, and complexities that had shaped her. She realized that listening, truly listening, was an act of respect and love, a way of honoring the past while acknowledging the present. He concluded the part of the story that dealt with the watch itself, explaining how it had come into his possession and the reasons for keeping it for so long. The waitress could see the relief in his eyes, the subtle easing of tension that came from finally speaking aloud the truth he had carried for years. It was a moment of release, a recognition that honesty, even when difficult, could bring a sense of closure and understanding. She felt a deep appreciation for the courage it took to share such personal and meaningful details. The cafe's background noise gradually returned to her awareness, but the atmosphere between them remained charged with significance. She reflected on the power of the story, the way it had shifted her perception of her mother and of the man across from her. It was a reminder that life is often a tapestry of interconnected moments, that small objects can hold immense meaning, and that people are shaped by experiences both seen and unseen. As the conversation drew to a temporary pause, the waitress took a moment to process everything she had heard. She felt a mix of emotions: surprise, empathy, pride, and a growing curiosity about the untold parts of her mother's past. The man looked at her with a tentative expression, as if seeking reassurance that his words had been received with understanding and compassion. She nodded gently, offering a silent affirmation that she had heard him, that she understood, and that she valued the honesty he had shown. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, casting a warm glow on the table between them. They both sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the story, the emotions it had stirred, and the unexpected connection that had formed. The watch, once a simple object, had become a bridge between past and present, between memory and understanding. It was a symbol of human experience, a reminder that even ordinary moments could carry extraordinary significance. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice calm and steady. He thanked the waitress for listening, for being patient, and for giving him the courage to share a story that had weighed heavily on him for so long. She smiled softly, acknowledging the gratitude, and felt a sense of fulfillment in knowing that this encounter had allowed for understanding and connection. It was a moment that neither of them would forget, a quiet testament to the power of honesty, empathy, and human connection. As the cafe continued its evening rhythm, they remained at the table, absorbing the weight of the past and the clarity of the present. The story of the watch, its journey, and the people involved had unfolded in a way that was both emotional and enlightening. For the waitress, it was a revelation about her mother's life and the unseen challenges she had faced. For the man, it was an opportunity to release years of guilt and uncertainty, to finally speak the truth, and to find a sense of peace. In that small corner of the cafe, amidst the ordinary sounds of everyday life, an extraordinary story had come to life, connecting two people across time, memory, and understanding. The sunlight outside had begun to soften as the afternoon slowly moved toward evening, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. The waitress and the man remained in their quiet corner, immersed in a conversation that seemed to exist outside of time. The story of the watch had unfolded, but there were still pieces of the past that had yet to be revealed. The man leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, and spoke with a new level of openness, as if the weight of years was slowly lifting from his shoulders. He began to recount the moments that followed the watch's disappearance. There had been confusion, hurt, and misunderstandings that affected not only her mother, but also the people around her. Each detail painted a vivid picture of how small actions and decisions could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways no one could predict. The waitress listened intently, imagining her mother navigating these moments with patience and courage. She could almost see her mother's face, her expressions of quiet strength and determination, handling challenges with grace even when the world seemed unfair. The man described how he had come to realize the impact of his choices. At the time, he had not fully understood the consequences, but over the years, memories had returned with clarity. The watch had been a symbol of trust, love, and integrity, and losing it had created an invisible tension that lingered long after the immediate events had passed. He admitted that he had carried guilt for years, wondering if he had failed to honor the intentions behind the gift. The waitress felt a mixture of empathy and respect, understanding that sometimes the hardest journeys are internal, and the heaviest burdens are invisible. He spoke of the moments when he had tried to make amends in subtle ways, actions that went unnoticed but were guided by a desire to set things right. The waitress noticed the careful thought in his words, the sincerity in his tone, and the depth of emotion that underpinned every sentence. It became clear that this story was not just about a watch but about the lessons learned, the courage to admit mistakes, and the quiet acts of kindness that often go unseen. The waitress could feel the tension that had existed for so long slowly easing. She realized that the man's openness and honesty were creating a bridge between the past and the present, between the story of her mother and the reality in front of her. She understood that forgiveness, understanding, and compassion were emerging from this conversation, offering a chance for both of them to heal and find closure. The cafe around them continued its rhythm, but for the two of them, the world had become more intimate, focused, and meaningful. He described a particularly difficult day when he had thought about returning the watch but had been held back by fear and uncertainty. The waitress imagined the internal struggle, the countless nights spent thinking about what was right and how to face the consequences. She could see the conflict in his expressions, the way his hands fidgeted slightly as he recounted the memory. It was a reminder that human beings are complex, that courage often requires confronting our fears, and that honesty can be both painful and liberating. The waitress leaned forward slightly, encouraging him with her presence, her eyes reflecting understanding and patience. He spoke about how he had finally recognized the importance of telling the truth, that the past could no longer remain unspoken, and that revealing the story was a necessary step toward healing. She could sense the relief in his voice, the subtle easing of tension, and the hope that was beginning to replace years of anxiety and guilt. He also shared details about her mother's resilience, the ways in which she had managed difficult situations, and the strength she had shown even when those around her did not fully understand. The waitress felt a sense of pride and admiration, realizing that her mother's courage had extended far beyond what she had ever known. The story revealed not only the man's journey but also illuminated the character and spirit of the woman who had shaped her life. It became a moment of deep connection, linking past and present through memory, honesty, and empathy. As the conversation continued, the man spoke about the unexpected ways people intersect in life, how small moments can lead to significant realizations, and how honesty can create opportunities for understanding and reconciliation. The waitress reflected on her own experiences, recognizing that the story unfolding before her was a testament to the complexity of human relationships and the importance of listening with compassion. She understood that the watch was more than an object. It was a symbol of the connections, choices, and emotions that shape lives. He explained how he had waited for the right moment to share the story, unsure if it would ever be possible or welcomed. Seeing her today, hearing her mention her mother, had created a space where the past could be acknowledged, and the truth could finally be spoken. The waitress felt the significance of this moment, realizing that timing, courage, and trust had converged to allow this conversation to happen. It was a rare and meaningful encounter, one that would remain with both of them long after they left the cafe. The man's tone softened as he spoke about his intentions, his desire to honor her mother's memory, and his hope that sharing the story would bring clarity and closure. The waitress could feel the authenticity in his words, the deep sense of responsibility, and the vulnerability that came with admitting past mistakes. It was a reminder that human connection often requires courage, openness, and a willingness to embrace difficult truths. As the afternoon faded into early evening, the cafe's atmosphere shifted. The sunlight turned golden, casting warm reflections on the walls and creating a sense of calm. The waitress felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that this conversation had provided an opportunity for understanding and healing. She realized that life often presents moments of chance, where honesty, empathy, and connection can create profound meaning. This encounter, sparked by a simple remark about a watch, had become one of those moments. The man then shared his reflections on how this experience had changed him, the lessons he had learned, and the ways in which carrying the truth had allowed him to grow. He spoke about empathy, responsibility, and the importance of facing the past with courage. The waitress felt inspired, recognizing that this story was not only about her mother or the watch but also about the human capacity for growth, reflection, and compassion. She asked gentle questions not out of curiosity alone, but to better understand the nuances of his journey and the decisions he had made. Each answer added depth and richness to the story, revealing the layers of emotion, thought, and experience that had shaped the events. The conversation became a shared exploration, a partnership in uncovering the truth and understanding its significance. The man's expressions shifted between relief, contemplation, and a subtle hope. He acknowledged the mistakes he had made and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to share them. The waitress felt the authenticity of his words and the sincerity of his intentions. She realized that this moment was rare, a genuine human connection born from honesty, courage, and the desire to make amends. The cafe's ambience continued around them, but it felt secondary to the importance of the conversation unfolding at their table. The story of the watch, the past events, and the emotions involved had created a space where empathy, reflection, and understanding could thrive. The waitress recognized the significance of this experience, appreciating how a simple object could carry so much meaning and how the courage to speak the truth could transform relationships. The man reflected on the idea of forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. He spoke about how sharing the story allowed him to seek a form of reconciliation, not only with her mother's memory but also with himself. The waitress nodded, understanding that forgiveness was a powerful tool, one that could heal wounds and build bridges between the past and the present. It was a lesson in humanity, one that transcended the immediate story and resonated on a deeper level. They both fell into a comfortable silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the conversation settle. The waitress thought about her mother, about the life she had lived, and about the connections that had brought them to this point. She felt a sense of gratitude for the chance to hear the story firsthand, for the opportunity to understand and reflect on the past, and for the unexpected human connection that had emerged in the cafe. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice calm and sincere. He expressed his appreciation for her willingness to listen, for the patience and understanding she had shown, and for allowing him to share a story that had been a burden for so long. The waitress smiled gently, acknowledging his gratitude and feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. She realized that this moment, though simple in appearance, was profound in its impact, bridging past and present through honesty, empathy, and human connection. As the evening light deepened, they continued to reflect on the story, the lessons it carried, and the ways in which it had brought them closer to understanding. The waitress felt that this encounter had changed her perspective, offering insights into her mother's life and into the nature of human relationships. The man seemed lighter, freer, having finally shared the truth and experienced the understanding that came with it. In that small corner of the cafe, a powerful moment of reconciliation and reflection had unfolded, leaving both of them with a sense of peace, clarity, and hope for the future. The cafe had taken on a calm, golden glow as the evening approached, the sunlight filtering through the windows in soft beams that danced across the tables. The waitress and the man remained in their quiet corner, reflecting on the stories and revelations they had shared. The conversation about the watch and the past had brought them closer to understanding not only the events themselves but also each other. It was clear that this encounter, which had begun with a casual comment, had grown into something far more meaningful. The man took a deep breath and leaned back slightly, a small smile playing on his lips. He spoke with a sense of relief and newfound clarity, describing how sharing the story had lifted a burden he had carried for so many years. The waitress could see it in his eyes. The tension that had been there from the moment she mentioned the watch was slowly dissolving. He admitted that he had felt a mixture of fear and hope when he first heard her words, unsure of how she would react, but her calm and understanding demeanor had made it easier for him to open up. She listened carefully, her own emotions reflecting the depth of the story. Part of her felt sadness for the struggles her mother had endured, but another part felt pride in knowing that her mother had been a person of integrity, strength, and generosity. The watch, once a simple object, had become a symbol of her mother's character and the human connections that had shaped both their lives. She realized that objects carry memories, and those memories can reveal truths that words alone might never capture. The man then spoke about the steps he had taken to make amends in his own life, the quiet actions he had pursued to right past mistakes. He described how he had reflected on his choices and sought to live with more honesty and compassion. The waitress felt inspired by his journey, understanding that redemption often comes through small, consistent efforts and the willingness to face one's past with courage. It was a lesson in human resilience and the capacity to grow from experiences, even difficult ones. They discussed the significance of forgiveness, both for others and for oneself. The man admitted that carrying guilt for so long had been exhausting, and that speaking the truth had allowed him to forgive himself in a way he had not thought possible. The waitress nodded, recognizing the importance of understanding that forgiveness is not just a gift to others, but a necessary part of finding peace within. She reflected on her mother's life, realizing that her actions had often embodied this very principle, showing strength, patience, and empathy even in challenging situations. As the conversation unfolded, the waitress felt a sense of closure begin to form. The story of the watch had been more than a tale of loss and recovery. It had been a journey through human emotions, relationships, and the small but significant choices that define a life. She realized that she had gained insight into her mother's character and into the nature of human connection itself. The man, too, seemed to have found a measure of peace, having finally shared the truth and witnessed the understanding it elicited. He shared a story about a moment when he had been tempted to hide the truth, thinking it might spare someone pain, but he realized over time that silence often caused more harm than honesty. The waitress could see the lesson clearly. The courage to speak, to acknowledge mistakes, and to confront the past is what allows relationships to heal and people to grow. She admired the vulnerability and sincerity with which he shared his experience, feeling that it was a rare and meaningful gift. The evening light shifted, casting a warm and gentle ambience over the cafe. The waitress reflected on the simplicity of the moment and the profound significance it held. Two people, brought together by a single remark about a watch, had shared stories, emotions, and reflections that connected them across time and memory. It was a reminder that even ordinary encounters can become extraordinary when honesty, empathy, and human understanding are present. The man expressed his hope that the conversation would also honor her mother's memory, that it would bring to light the strength, kindness, and integrity that she had shown throughout her life. The waitress felt a wave of appreciation, realizing that this story was a tribute not only to her mother, but also to the values and lessons she had instilled. She saw how the past, when shared openly and respectfully, could inspire reflection and growth in the present. They discussed what the future might hold, acknowledging that life continues with its challenges and joys, but that understanding the past provides guidance for navigating it. The waitress felt a sense of calm, knowing that the story of the watch, once fraught with confusion and regret, had been transformed into a narrative of clarity, compassion, and connection. She could see how the lessons from the past might influence her own choices and interactions, shaping the person she was becoming. The man reached into his bag and gently took out the watch, placing it on the table between them. He spoke about the care he had taken to preserve it, the thought that had gone into ensuring it remained intact, and the hope that it would once again find its rightful place in the story of her family. The waitress looked at it carefully, seeing not just an object of metal and glass, but a repository of memories, lessons, and human emotion. It was a tangible reminder of the power of honesty, the importance of relationships, and the unexpected ways in which life's paths can cross. She thanked him softly, acknowledging the significance of his gesture and the journey that had led them to this point. The man smiled, relieved and grateful for her understanding and kindness. There was a quiet satisfaction in the room, a sense that a chapter had been completed and that both of them had emerged from the conversation with a deeper awareness of themselves and each other. The cafe continued its gentle evening rhythm, but for the two of them, the moment held a special, lasting weight. The waitress reflected on her own experiences, her interactions with other customers, and the lessons she had learned over the years about empathy, patience, and observation. She realized that this encounter had crystallized many of those lessons in a profound and personal way. It was a reminder that life is full of small moments that can reveal extraordinary truths when we are willing to listen and engage with sincerity. The man spoke once more, sharing a few final thoughts about how much he had learned from the experience and how it had changed his perspective on relationships, accountability, and connection. He expressed gratitude for her presence, for the opportunity to share the story, and for the understanding she had shown. The waitress nodded, feeling a sense of fulfillment and closure, knowing that the conversation had reached a natural and meaningful conclusion. As the evening deepened, the cafe lights began to glow warmly, complementing the last rays of sunlight. The waitress and the man exchanged final words of appreciation, both aware that this encounter would remain with them long after they left the cafe. The watch, now resting safely on the table, symbolized more than a past event. It represented the culmination of understanding, honesty, and human connection that had developed over the course of their conversation. They stood, gathering their belongings, and shared a quiet moment of acknowledgement. The waitress felt a profound sense of gratitude for the experience, realizing that life often presents opportunities for connection and understanding in unexpected ways. The man, too, seemed lighter, freer, having shared his story, expressed his remorse, and witnessed the empathy and insight it had inspired. As they parted ways, the waitress returned to her duties with a renewed sense of purpose and awareness. She carried with her not only the story of the watch but also the lessons embedded within it, the importance of listening, the courage to speak truth, and the power of human connection. The man walked away with a sense of relief and hope, knowing that honesty and understanding had bridged the gap between past mistakes and present awareness. The cafe settled into the quiet of the evening, with a sense of calm and reflection lingering in the air. The story of the watch had been fully revealed, and with it came a sense of closure, growth, and insight for both the waitress and the man. What had begun as a casual remark had transformed into a profound encounter, demonstrating the unexpected ways in which ordinary moments can hold extraordinary meaning. In that small cafe, amidst the gentle rhythm of everyday life, two people had connected, shared, and discovered truths that would remain with them forever. The waitress paused briefly at the counter, looking out the window at the fading light, reflecting on the day's events. She thought about her mother, the lessons learned, and the ways in which stories can carry wisdom, empathy, and understanding. She felt a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that the truth had been shared and that connections had been strengthened. The watch, a small object that had sparked the entire conversation, now symbolized something far greater, a reminder of life's complexity, the value of honesty, and the enduring power of human connection. As night fell, the cafe lights illuminated the space with a warm, inviting glow. The waitress moved among the tables, serving the remaining customers, but her mind lingered on the story and the lessons it had imparted. She understood that the encounter had changed her perspective, deepened her empathy, and given her a greater appreciation for the intricate ways in which people's lives are intertwined. The man had left, but the impact of their conversation would remain, a quiet, powerful presence in her thoughts. The evening drew to a close, and the cafe emptied gradually, leaving the waitress alone with the gentle hum of cleaning and the soft clatter of dishes. She reflected once more on the watch, the story, and the people involved. It was a reminder that every person carries a story, often hidden beneath the surface, and that listening, understanding, and showing empathy can reveal truths that enrich our lives. The day had begun like any other, but it had ended with a moment of connection, reflection, and profound human insight. And in that quiet, sunlit space, the story of the watch had come full circle, leaving a lasting impression on both the listener and the storyteller.